All right, so let's take a look at where we left off. If I hit spacebar, you can see my house kind of collapses in on itself. The thing with this is this can be kind of expensive. Um, all of this kind of all the having all these physics objects in the scene. So a way to conserve memory or space, especially if you have a slower computer, is to actually bake all of this physics information to keyframes. And that's these down here. So for example, if I select this piece now and I hit spacebar, you can see that it falls and it has movement, but it's only being controlled by these constraints in physics objects. In the summary or my timeline here, you don't see any sort of keyframe information. And what keyframes do is it consolidates, or it really locks down the positioning of every one of this object moving in 3D space. So all of these things, it'll key on every frame. So what I can do here is, because our thing is 130 frames, really we only need to be about 80. Let's see when this stops. I guess it does go all the way to 130. It's just when it's scrolling, it needs time to catch up. All right, so what I'm going to do here is right click on building pieces folder and do select objects. And I don't mind that it's selecting that bottom one. I don't care if it keys it. I mean, you could hold shift and click on it twice to remove it, but it's up to you. I'm going to go to object here, and I'm going to go to rigid body, and I'm going to do bake 2 keyframes. And it says, well, where do you want to start and end it? I want to start at 1. I want to end at 130. I'm going to hit OK. And that usually takes a second. Don't be worried if it like freezes. I mean, that's kind of Blender computing. If it crashes on you a couple times, you should be okay. Just try it again. So another key advantage you'll see here is if I go in here and I essentially go to my rigid body or my physics section, you'll see that now all the physics pieces, let's see if we can, I think it's just Shift G. Yeah, and then collection. And it's selecting everything in that collection. You can see now none of them have that rigid body force on any of these pieces. So now it's just a much cleaner file, which is really great. And if I press play, you could see the simulation runs pretty much the same. It's just all of those pieces have an animation component to them. So I can actually go in here and just say, you know what? I would like this piece. Let's see. Maybe this piece, I don't want it to animate at all. So I'll just go in here, select all these keyframes, hit X and delete keyframe. Oops. It looks like it glitched a little bit. X, delete keyframe. And if I press play now, you could see all of those other pieces except that one have animated keys because it doesn't have a rigid body or keyframes. But keyframe animation is really, this is also good too, because if you're working in a game engine and you want to, this is kind of like creating destructible objects. You'd have your original building. So let me hide building pieces, for example. You would have this building in your game. And what you would do is, after this building has been shot or destroyed or whatever, it would automatically, an engineer would actually probably code this, or a tech artist, it would switch to this one and this would be your destroyed state. But what's cool about it is you could save on rigid body physics. And inside of game engines too, they're called rigid bodies too. Like I'm using Unreal now at work and we call it rigid bodies. I'm going to save my scene. This might cause me to crash, but I'm going to go ahead and hit Shift G here, and I'm going to click on collection. Actually, I don't want that selected. Let's see if it, yeah, I've got to select my constraint. So let's turn the constraints back on, and then I'm going to click one of these. All right, so just to be clear, sorry about the video jumping around. I had to update to 4.3.2, which is the most stable release, because 4.3.3.1 kept crashing on me like an unbelievable amount. So if that's happening to you, do that. But this one seems okay. So I'm going to select one constraint, because right now we have all of this keyframe information there. So I'm going to select one of these, hit Shift G, collection, cont, which is this folder here, to select all of them. And then I'm just going to hit X, and then I'm going to delete those, and then I'm going to hit Control S to save it, just in case. I don't know how stable this version is, but this one seems a heck of a lot more stable than my last one. And same thing up here, I can just delete this constraints folder. So now I have all of this stuff taken care of, which is cool, you know, and I could hit play or hit spacebar there, shift and back. And it's just a much cleaner scene when we go to share this with other people, you know, like, you know, if I want to work on, if I'm working on this with somebody else. And I think part of most of your project each week is I'm just going to have you work with somebody and do something cool, so that you're not just kind of working on stuff on your own. And just overall, like, Yeah, I think this is cool. And the truth is, like, if you're completely satisfied with this and you think it looks fine and it captures all the nuances of the assignment, uh, then you're good to go on my end. Right. So what we're gonna do next is we're going to make this take all of these pieces, and instead of just them being in a folder, we're gonna make them part of a collection. They're gonna group them together using something called geometry nodes. The basics of geometry nodes is it's just a system where we use geometry. We use a node-based system to control the geometry, and I do a lot of this in my game studies class where we talk about this because I feel like that's kind of the current state of things. It visually graphs it. So we're not going to get into deep into geometry nodes in this class, but just kind of cool for you to see it. So what I want to do is notice I'm moving my cursor just on the edge above my timeline. I'm going to right click and I'm going to do a horizontal split. I'm going to move this here and I'm going to change this here from 3D viewport to geometry node editor. And so this is our geometry node editor. Now what I want to do too is I'm going to hide my building pieces folder for a second. And it looks like the staircase really should be inside of there. And then I'm going to hit, maybe this ball should be in there too. Just for now. Let's leave the ball out. So I'm going to hit Shift A here. And let's make sure I just select the generic collection here. And I'm going to create a mesh and I'm going to create a plane here. And you don't have to adjust the size. We're just using this at this point to be sort of a container for our geometry. All right, so with this plane selected, I'm going to click New here. And I'm just going to rename it from geometry nodes here to building. And I'm going to scroll my wheel in to zoom on this. All right, next thing I'm going to do is grab this whole building pieces folder and just drag it in here. And it'll actually create a node that represents all of the different building pieces there. So see how it says collection info building pieces. Now, if you want to see what this is inside of our viewport, you hit Control and then Shift. Oops, Control and Shift. Make sure that we Control Shift and click on the node. There we go. Okay, sorry, it'll add this viewer node. You could also drag this out and type viewer here in case it's not Command Shift or whatever it is, and you can click on that and that'll actually bring up that. Forgive me, I'm not using a Mac. I plan to buy a Mac workstation soon to record my lectures for the students who use Mac as well. Now, if you don't see this, another thing is like if you hit Control Shift click and this doesn't work again, you can go to Edit and then Preferences and over here in add-ons, you can search for Node Wrangler and just turn that on and make sure that you always save your preferences. And that's another reason why maybe your stuff isn't working. Let me click back here a second. I'm going to hit Alt-Z. Right now, we haven't even connected really that plane that we created. Let me hide my building here. Let me actually break this for a second. So I'm going to just drag this. Let's see if I can select this. Just delete it from them. You can see here's our plane here. So what I want to do is if I want this to be the final output that these building pieces exist here, I'm going to just left click and just drag it into geometry. Now you can see that the actual little plane is gone. Let me go ahead and just sort of scroll in here and see if you could see that underneath. The little plane is gone now. It's just these building pieces. And you could still hit Control Shift and left click and leave that viewer node if you want it in there. But now this is part of the final group. So all of these are in this group output now. If you look over here on this plane and I expand this, this is now part of this, right? And this building pieces is actually a separate collection inside of here. So we can leave that off. And we're actually using now this collection information or this geometry node that's storing a reference to all of those pieces. Just to kind of test it to show you that it still works, if I bring this up here and I hit spacebar, you can see it still works the same. These pieces still have the same animations on them. It's just right now when I click on it, it's one big collection. Do you see that? Instead of having to select each individual piece or right click up here. And this is just kind of a nice useful tool. whenever you're like working in a scene or working with anybody. Now, one other potential issue here is if I click on this, you could see it's one group. If you want to adjust it, because right now I can't add like rigid bodies or anything to the individual pieces again, or if I want to mess with it again. So you need something called a realize node. So I'm going to hit Shift A, do a search and start typing in realize. And I'm looking for realize instances. And what I'm going to do is it just kind of locks itself to your cursor. I'm just going to click on this line here. And now what happens is you can see that it realizes it all as a mesh, like these different geometry. So right now you can see if we scroll through this, I'm selecting this and it's selecting it as a chunk, right? If I hit M to disable that, you can see it's just selecting it as this collection, that's this group geometry. So I'm gonna hit M as in mark again. And what you can do is say we want to add a particle system to this, right? So here, let me kind of just kind of rotate this a bit so you could see this. If I was to add this without it knowing that this is a modifier, it won't emit particles from each piece of geometry, right? That's why we need this. So right here is where we can apply particles. And if I just hit plus to add just a generic particle system here, and you can see it says use modifier stack. I'm gonna actually hit Control S to save this. If I scroll through this, you can see it's just displaying a particle from the whole, like this, it's treating it as one big chunk instead of the individual mesh pieces. And so let's go ahead and turn on use modifier stack. And what's going to happen now is now it registers because we have that geometry node. We have that building geometry node system, this one right here. And it now will emit particles from each individual broken piece. Do you see that? It's kind of coming off the whole building instead of just coming off one. So it's registering all of those as like their each individual mesh is as part of a grouped object. So how did I know, sorry, for example, that it's a modifier? If you go to your modifier stack here, you can see we have geometry nodes as one, and then we have this particle system as another. All right, I think that's good for now. That was a lot to kind of take in this video. What we'll do in the next video is we'll take these particles and we'll turn them into, some of them into geometry. So it'll look like additional, once the building falls, like there's additional pieces of geometry coming off the building and exploding.